Hello, welcome to the first training arc. This will be a series, I hope, that will be ongoing. And so for our first workshop, it will be on line art. So it will be a demonstration on line art, communication in art, and expression. My name is BD Chow. I'm a University of Waterloo alumni of 2020 from the program Global Business and Digital Arts. I've been a product designer, UI UX, and I've been an illustrator, but illustrating is my bread and butter. Over to the right, you can see a QR code that will lead to a link of links where you can keep in contact with me through social media such as Instagram and Facebook. And I do have my email available there too. These are a selection of my artworks. You can see how there's like a lot of like surrealism and rendering. And there's a QR code on the bottom left corner of the slides. And so you may also wonder, these are all rendered paintings. I don't really see line art in it, and that's a great question if you had it. These would be the line arts that you would kind of see underneath a lot of my paintings. These ones are a little bit more finished, so these ones are a line art style that I've done, combining it with another lesson that I've kind of taken on my own, which was body diversity and shape language to kind of uh, illustrate a more dynamic character design. And so let's get started. Here's our course structure. So the first 30 minutes will be on the lecture. 50 minutes will be allocated to the exercise. And then the 25 minutes will be the draw over, where people who submit on the Discord Visual Arts Club Discord channel would have their stuff be drawn over if they wish to have it drawn over. And then 15 minutes will be allocated to Q&A and closing. So yeah, let's get started. An introduction to line art. We do have two main objectives that we would like to tackle when considering line art. So the beauty of line art is that a lot of the elements in line art don't necessarily have to be clearly defined. I think that the unfinished nature of each line art or each work kind of lends itself to the mystery as to approaching a concept of something. It doesn't necessarily have to be like the final statement of itself, but it very well could be. And so we have two main goals here. So we have capturing the drawing's essence in its ambiguity, energy, and rawness. So what does this exactly mean? So if we do take notice here, following this leftmost example here, with Kentaro Miura's example, we can see how this drawing evokes a lot of energy that stems from underneath the chin and also the furrowing of the eyes, where if we follow the path of the tangents and the lines, it kind of evokes a sense of tension and movement. And so we see a lot of details if we zoom in closer that are completely blurred out because of like the extreme movement that this drawing conveys. Now, it's a flat drawing. We all know that this is like just a static image of something, and so to convey some kind of like motion blur, the form is going to be very obscured, almost smeared. So we can also kind of see the same thing with like the eyebrows leading into the hair. It's almost a very visceral, beast-like kind of expression, and so this is what the drawing kind of conveys, where it doesn't necessarily need to be like legible in a sense where the jawline is separate from like the ear, separate from like the hairline, etc. We can clearly see that this is a kind of like motion and progress, especially a very intense kind of emotion. Um, Following this middle example, we can see that the expression in here is also very vivid, but it's a lot more subdued. It's a lot more static. So a lot of the lines are very much like they're defined clearly, so especially like in the shoulder, but there's like a kind of jittery nature to it, like a very subtle jitter, as if it's like some kind of intense energy that is being slowly held together, almost like an unstable kind of emotional um, state. So we can kind of see how the artist conveys like a sense of darkness that is trying to be held together, but is still seeping out one way or another through the hatching. We can see how the hair is also very crooked, very sharp, very angular, very hostile, and very closed off. There's like a sense of vulnerability to it that is almost like it's being ashamed of being let out. And so this is also like another goal of line art where there's just so many like different like wavinesses to like the single form where it could easily be kind of like done in one stroke or done in like one single line. There's like a disjointed kind of like crooked effect to it, which I think makes this drawing very appealing to study from. Um, yeah. So the second main goal, which is kind of like the opposite um, to like the expression of this, is clarity. So for something like this, I use Araki's example of this manga panel, where it's to improve draftsmanship to portray information clearly. So if you can zoom in to this example, you can kind of see how the jawline is defined, is separate from the hat. The hat has its own intricate like detail with like the pattern, the little talisman, the kind of like decals that are on the hat, even down to like the buckle is being carefully drawn out and considered. Of course, the signature hair blending into the hat is very much his style that he's never really let go of for this character. Um, the chains, the chains are its own thing, separate from the jacket. Even the jacket has like embellishments, kind of like this like ribbon that tracks along the contours of the shoulder and the arms. The belt has its own personality. You can tell that this is like snakeskin, snakeskin versus maybe something like this would be like maybe like pleather. You can kind of infer that this is maybe cotton. This is metal. It's almost like its own character sheet. So with that being said, we're going to kind of explore um, both of these like dichotomies, and there will be an exercise at the end that will allow you to kind of like explore where you want to kind of like reach, or like what your goal would be. So maybe it would be more on the expression side. Um, we can use lines to kind of cleverly convey that, whereas with maybe like people who are interested more in draftsmanship, there can be like careful consideration with like information hierarchy and how like line thicknesses can kind of help you read an image better. Tools of the trade. This one is kind of tricky. We have like this section where I would call highly recommended. Um, so whether you're traditional, this section would probably be more applicable to you. I think a felt tip pen or ballpoint pen is like, first of all, opaque. Second of all, If you make a mistake, you have to commit to it. And then 3, since you're not going to like undo something or redo something quickly, it forces you to think about the lines that you put down. Think about the lines you put down. Before you actually make it. So it kind of puts you in this very like on edge kind of feeling where each stroke that you do matters. And so this kind of gets you into a good habit of maybe like thinking twice before you kind of put something, instead of having it like haphazardly on the page for the sake of having it on the page. So this one, for digital artists, I would highly recommend, which is just keep it simple. So we do have a circle brush right here, just something regular, nothing too special. And we do, so 100% opacity, just like the felt tip pen and the ballpoint pen. But something to also consider as well is pressure sensitivity. So something that kind of creates like this nice crisp line when you just draw. It allows you to kind of like tackle line thickness at the same time. So felt tip pen and ballpoint pen naturally do that. But I think the classic circle brush would be a close contender to the real life tools. Of course, use whatever tools that you would like to do for like the line art effect that you want. But for beginners, I think just something nice, simple, and clean would kind of help you put something down before maybe like exploring something a little bit different. This section is a little bit more for like seasoned experts or like artists. I would consider maybe trying out potentially some textured or jittery brushes. So I do have like some 3 examples that are not exclusive to what can be used, but just to demonstrate like the different effects that it has. The wonderful thing about textured brushes is that it gives your line art a little bit more like tangible, real effect. So that's something that's really nice about these brushes. Number 2, just creates like a lot more interest. 3 is a cheat. This is just like a little like wink wink, nudge nudge. But if you were to draw with a textured brush, you can hide a lot of like the unstable lines. So as you can see like on this side right here, with the classic brush example that I've done, you can kind of see like the wobbly kind of like nature of it. That's because I didn't use a stabilizer that came with this program. So that will be kind of like the side effect that you will get. But with a texture brush, a lot of that can be hidden. So a lot of like the kind of like jitter or wobbly effect is hidden. It's really nice. However, with texture brushes, cons. I would probably just put a warning here. Maybe something like this. There we go. Something like this. A con is these are brushes that are hard to capture tiny details because they're so dense in like texture that when you when you decrease the size, it's going to be very hard to have like a very like clear defined line without it looking like a spot or a speckle of like dust. And another one is it's easy to make your artwork look messy. there's just so much information like in this single stroke that if you're not careful with your lines, it can look very it can be like very information dense and maybe not in like the areas or ways that you want it to be or intended to. So just something to consider when tackling line art. I like to use both. Some cases would prefer like the classic brush over the textured brush. So for example, classic brush is really good for like anime style line art or like comic book line art, where you might want to color something. Um, Maybe just have like a fill, so you have like a smiley face like right here, and then like you can like have like a fill tool to like completely color this like yellow or something. Um, Whereas with a textured brush, if you fill it, there's going to be like gaps of white that you can see between like the outline and like the fill area, which is not very ideal. Textured brushes are really good for just capturing something, um, and the textured nature is like its own kind of style. Um, that doesn't really need any other elements like color or like rendering to kind of take away from it. So yeah, just a few things to consider. Honestly, if you're just confused by the end of this spiel for the tools of the trade, just stick with the classic circle brush. It's reliable, it's good, it's available on every device. Or a ballpoint pen, felt tip pen. You can find that in your pencil case. You can probably borrow one from another friend. Contours aren't real. They can't hurt you. But what exactly is a contour? A contour is what I've kind of defined here, a relative boundary of planar or objective differences. What does this mean? The lines that we draw in our artwork are not necessarily real, but they're just a way for us to separate elements or separate like objects from other things. So I do have a reference image here where we do have a picture of a face. And this value limiting filter is closer to how our brain perceives information. So there's clusters of like shadows and darks, and there's like areas of light that kind of just like create like really strong shapes for us to kind of like define and recognize our everyday surroundings. So there's like a large part of the face here. There's like part of the eyelids that are kind of like on the outer side of the eye. And we do have like the negative space in between. So there's like the shadow underneath the nose, the corners of the mouth, and kind of like the inside of the mouth, the inner kind of like brow area where it meets like the inner corner of the eye. Of course, like there's like this head wrap right here that kind of like has like this major block of shadow. There's part of the ear, there's the cheekbones, we do see that. And then there's like this fur trim, and then there's like just this random piece in the background. And this is how we kind of like capture um, information to like define like what it is that we're seeing, and maybe like who it is that we're seeing with like the different shadow shapes that are casted for like different and unique faces. Um, However, this is not exactly useful to us when drawing line art, um, because line art kind of just is composed of like boundaries. Boundaries where we can say, oh, this, let's say for example, definitely want to define the head wrap being different than part of the head itself. So kind of like this. I would also maybe say this fur trim is also like important because it kind of like conveys like this um, essence of like a very high fashion model figure, especially with like the fur trim. It's kind of like hiding behind it a little bit, creates a bit of mystery and intrigue, which I really like. But you know, like another person can choose to say, oh, you know what, I really don't want that there. Like maybe I just want to stick with like the figure itself, and I'm not necessarily that interested in the fur, so they can easily just like finish like the line and just draw as if the fur was never there in the first place. That is an active choice that an artist would make. As you can see here in like the facial expression, I decided to define the eyebrows a little bit more to compensate for the shadow that I chose not to put in here. I also wanted to define the nose a little bit with the shape because I felt like there was not enough information to kind of illustrate that in the value limiting filter. But of course, feel free to include as many like planes as you want to your drawing. Corners of the eyes, I decided to emphasize a little bit more in the lashes. I felt that the shadow of whatever is happening in this eyelid was not necessarily informing the kind of like information that I wanted to relay. The ear I've also kept very minimal with just lines because I didn't want it to steal focus away from the face. And of course for the neck I just kept it a simple line, but I just indicated like a bit of shadow here to not overpower the drawing and draw all the attention to the neck with like a solid color kind of block shading. But of course that just is a choice that any other artist can make if they so choose, and maybe there is a good purpose that they want to color this whole area. So there's not really a right and wrong answer. It's just choices that you make to kind of like show the information that you want to show, or just omit something that you feel is not too important. So like this area right here, this dark patch, I felt, you know what, I just don't think that really adds any like sense of like thematic relevance or symbolism or just like important or relevant information to this portrait, so I just completely got rid of it. So that's also to illustrate that there's no right or wrong, it's just how you want to frame something. I do have a draftsmanship kind of like quick tips to maybe get the lines that you want to intend to get down. So if I were to illustrate this, first lesson is on confident lines. So we want lines that are very legible and clear. When you speak in a way where it's just like, I have a goal that I want to relay from A to B, and the less interruptions or the less meandering I can get from A to B, the clearer my message will be, and it will be easier for the other person to know what to interpret from it and respond. So it's not too different with drawing as well. So to create like good brush economy and to create like very clear legible lines that you don't have to spend like 5, 6, maybe 7 like different like short lines to kind of like illustrate, plan your line route. So I think it would be like a really good exercise, at least in this demonstration, to kind of like illustrate that with like Momo's hair, because I think her hair is very simple, but it's also got very useful shape language for us to learn from. So maybe I want to start from here down to here. So how would that look like? I'm just going to capture this color. I'm going to steal this color. So I'm going to start from A to B here. I am going to draw and maybe like try to aim to have like this part be tackled as well. Just if you're unconfident, at least like draw lightly. You can always make it heavier. So I overshot it a little bit. Let me try again. I'm gonna try again. I feel like I can do better. Sometimes it takes multiple attempts to get like the right line. Oop, that's too heavy. Nope. If it helps, zoom out while you do this, and that way your motion can be a lot more achievable, especially if you're using your whole arm. So let's try again. It's not a bad shape. Let's try again. Come on, I can do this. You know what? Good enough. If it helps, let's see here, show context toolbar. There's a stabilizer that you can use, and maybe that will make your brush strokes a lot easier and more achievable with like a smoother kind of like transition. There we go. No, I don't use that one. I use this one instead. Honestly, it depends. There you go. So that was all in one movement, and the reason why I tell you to try this is because if you were to try, like, oh, you know what, this stroke is not as manageable in one go. If you try doing like multiple, it doesn't look too bad, but you can kind of see how there's like a bump, kind of like that, like right here. And if you zoom in closer, oh, nope, forgive the leg. If you zoom in closer, there's potential that the lines may not line up. So this is a lot more likely to occur, and it's very frustrating to fix. It's very difficult. It's very annoying. It would be just much easier if you were to just undo the stroke and then just go over it again. Or even better, if you were to have like a pencil sketch, you would practice that stroke many times before you go over it with ink where something's a lot more permanent. So just a heads up. So yeah, that is delved into a little bit with the try to use one stroke. Sometimes things are inevitable. You'll have to just like try to break things up. If you don't mind any gaps, I like to use gaps in my drawings. It kind of creates like a lot of mystery and intrigue, but I know with like a lot of artists, they close the gaps for a utility, for like just like filling in their line art with color later on. But yeah, third tip is to commit then correct later. So Momo's hair is also a really good practice for this because she has a lot of pieces that like overlap and kind of like interweave with each other. So we do have like this little cowlick that she has. Usually I would see some artists, they would just like, let me turn the stabilizer again. So they would just like, they would like stop at like the boundary, and then like they would just like continue after, and then like erase something like this. It's not wrong, but you can see how like there's this strange little there's like this like little like hiccup in like the line weight, whereas if you were to go, and then it's also illustrated here too, like this is clearly different than this like small little line right here. And it's just like there is a way to kind of like make this line art a little bit more appealing, which is just to draw through the line. Just draw through it like this. Just try something like that. And then like it's hard to meet at the corner like that. I got it in one try, but that was because this line was much thicker, so it's a lot more forgiving in that aspect. But just like cross the lines, and it's easier to kind of erase them. So let me try that again. You'll find that with like line art, you'll have to like try again multiple times, and there's nothing wrong with that. It all depends on like the type of look that you want to achieve. So you saw me before, I erased like the stray lines so that the corners come at like a really nice crisp sharp tip, and then through this boundary on the back of the head here, I can just slowly chip away at erasing it and trying to mimic and preserve the stroke that went through for the cowlick. Alright, so just erase this for a sec. I don't need these guides anymore. This is just something to kind of like be conscious of when you draw. You don't have to like literally plot A to B, C to D, gamma to delta. Like that's not necessary. Just like a mental note in your head is like enough. So I'm just gonna keep drawing a little bit of, oops. There we go. Just nice little touches that make the hair look a lot more three-dimensional and a lot more organic. There we go. And we're going to illustrate the same thing with these crisscrossing bangs that she has. So just, there we go. Just don't be afraid to draw on top. Don't be afraid to crisscross a lot of lines. You're not going to like it, it's probably not going to be the final result, but just hang in there. There we go. I like that line. Yeah, see, this is the mistake I made. I should have overshot this line. Now it's harder for me to fix. This one as well. I should have overshot this one. But you learn from my mistakes, so. Overshoot it. Oh, that's perfect. Okay. Lucky. As you get better with drawing, you'll find a lot of lucky coincidences that just work out and save you a lot of time, so it really pays to practice. Alright, let's erase the strays. This is going to be very satisfying. There we go. You know what, maybe it's not so perfect. There we go. That should be better. Erase this tip here. Erase that. Maybe I'll tackle this one. Oh, that's not so good. Erase along the tangent. I wouldn't recommend erasing parallel to the drawing. This looks fine, but you might have like that squared off tip, which is not so appealing for shape design. I know it's tiny, but I would just totally recommend to erase along the curve that you've established, just to kind of create a nice shape language. If something looks good from afar, it'll look good up close, and if something looks good up close, it means that at least you showed some care and attention to your drawing, and that will not be ignored. Like, that will be noticed for sure. So this one's tricky. Which hair do I want to go in front? Maybe I'm going to erase this one. Just nice, subtle line. If I want to like just thicken it a bit, it's no problem since it's a heavy part of the hair. You know what? I'll do this instead. I like this more. And just a few more strokes before we finish up with Momo, and we'll move on to Okurun. Just nice sweeping motion. Maybe I was a little too heavy-handed. Just something like this. Doesn't quite match up with her hair in the reference picture for the sketch I established. That's okay though. We can always make it up. There we go. Maybe something like that. And then just perfect. And now we just do like a nice cleanup job. Something like this. Where else would I miss? There it is. Just missing out. Here. Yeah. And then of course, like final touches, I can just like cast a shadow where the hair meets underneath another piece of hair. So here. And just final details, I can just add some more dimension. Oh, I forgot this section. With the stabilizer, you kind of have to just like overdraw and overshoot so that the stabilizer can catch up. I turned off stabilizer for the eraser though, so I have like a lot more control, especially if it's going to be like a small scale kind of like detail, like erasing the stray bits of hair. Yeah, I think you know what, maybe just add a little bit, something like that. Yeah, not too bad. Oh, and I always keep finding more things to fix. That's okay though. Knowing what to fix means that you're already addressing the problem and you know how to make it better. So that's overshot. There we go. Yeah, not bad, not too shabby. Just gonna darken this, and I probably shouldn't spend too long. I should probably move on to the next character. Good thing to learn when you're doing a study is know when to stop. So, moving on to Okurun. His hair is a little bit more tricky. It's very chaotic, it's very, like, short, and there's not much swooping, like, graceful curves that he has. Kind of reflects his mental state. So I would just keep it short. So a lot of these lines I can probably just get away with like a lot more sporadic kind of shape language. I would probably turn off stabilizer since these strokes are short and I don't need that much assistance anyways. And so like the control of the line is going to be a lot more feasible. So maybe something like that. Just like tufts of waves to indicate that this is just like sporadic, like wavy, kind of like organic texture. Like no need to just like have like a perfect stroke. I feel like just like a lot of times, a lot of gaps in drawings can create a lot of like room for the imagination. So maybe if I were to kind of like push it a little bit and make it a little bit more textured, I would probably add like more tufts of hair within like the inner part of the hair. Bangs are going to be a little bit hard though, so let me see if I can tackle that. So just to kind of define okay, something like this. Alright. I really like short hair because it's like more forgiving than like the long swoopy hair where like a lot of the imperfections can be caught. Let's see how this drawing looks without the sketch. I know this is like a scary part in a lot of the drawing process. Okay, it's not too bad. It's not bad. Not bad at all. I hope this demonstration kind of like illustrates like what confident lines look like and what habits to kind of establish to achieve this effect. This one's about line thickness. So going over the properties of line thickness and how it can kind of affect your drawing. We have thick lines, very good for like establishing visual weight. You can use it to cast shadows or ambient occlusion. So ambient occlusion is areas where shadows are made, there are areas of shadows where no light can reach. No light can reach. What would that look like? That would probably be maybe like the nostrils of the nose, maybe like tucked behind like the hair and behind the ear, and maybe behind the jaw, is where light is very, very hard to reach. Corners of the mouth is where like the ambient occlusion would be, like the inner corners of like the eyes, for example, is also where like a lot of shadow takes place. There's lots of places that we can kind of find that effect. So maybe even like the armpits as well, where it's hard for like the light to get through. And thick lines can also be used to draw closer objects. If you take a cube, let's say for example, and you were to kind of like just draw it normally, we wouldn't really have a sense of scale, and we wouldn't really know what is closer or what isn't closer. However, if we were to compare and bring like the cube closer to us, oops, there we go, then not only can we say that these two are maybe the same thing, but with the line weight, it also implies that it's like larger and closer towards us. A really cool effect is maybe just like keep the cube example, but like just to kind of like give it further dimensionality, I'm just going to draw it side by side. This corner is obviously going to be closer to us, the viewer, so we are going to illustrate that by like just making this corner, or at least lines progressing to this corner, thicker, kind of like this, kind of like that, something like this. And then like maybe we can like make the line art for the corners that are further away more thin. So it will be hard to illustrate the effect. It's just maybe something like this. And then like since this corner right here is also going to be closer to us, we're going to just darken that a little bit, and this will kind of just make our shape look a little bit more dynamic. On the opposite side, thin lines decrease visual weight. It carves out highlights. So this circle looks pretty flat. However, if we just increase the shadow underneath it, it kind of gives it a bit more dimensionality. The light looks like it's coming from this side. Another effect that we can do is just like slightly erase where the light is coming from, so it looks like it's almost bleeding into the background. As with light, it decreases the contrast between the object and the background. So this is the kind of effect that we see like this. That's what I would do to carve out a highlight. That is like on the edge of the object. And then it's also to illustrate objects that are further. So of course, if we were to draw this cube from far away, this cube here gives us the illusion that it's farther away than this cube that is bigger and closer. Taking a look at this line art, I think the shape language is very clear. However, I feel like we can push how dynamic this piece is by adding some thickness. It's already very thin, so I think I'm just going to focus on one aspect, which is just like thickening the parts that are closer, thickening the parts that are cast under shadow, and thickening the parts that are closer. Starting with the face, since we already kind of gotten started with it already, I've already gotten started with this plane of the nose. I like to darken that area just to kind of like define the light and also create a clear kind of contrast for the nose in relative to the face. So I would probably darken this area a little bit more since it's kind of under shadow. Something like that. Maybe even here too. Create some nice shadows in the face. Something like that. The eyelid is going to darken. That's where it's hard for light to reach. So just patiently draw that part. This part of the cheekbone I also want to define a little bit more. It's going to be in the shadow anyways, so I do like that angular shape that it created compared to like the rounder shape that it had before. Darken this chin line a little bit more and then cast a shadow underneath the ear. There's these lines that are conflicting. Underneath the hair bangs, where the sideburns meet, is a really good place to cast a shadow. Just carefully draw the bangs as well. This area is going to be met with quite a bit of shadow, so I'm going to draw a more subtle kind of curve. And then the clothes, I'm also going to draw like this. Okay. Something like that. Maybe just color in this lip a little bit. I don't like that shape. And darken underneath the lips where it hits the chin. And already I think from far away it's a lot more legible and the face looks more appealing. Maybe not draw it all the way. I like that gap in between the corner of the lip and the corner or the top corner. Tie. This is going to take a very long time since like it's a whole body or like full body drawing. So of course it's just like kind of hard to capture where all of the corners are. I'm also going to like recommend for like the hair that's closer to us to kind of like bold it a little bit more, as if the hair is coming towards us. It creates like this really nice kind of like dimensional pose. Kind of makes the hair look alive. So already drawing like some parts of the hair being thicker create like this really nice effect. I'm going to do the same thing here. And I'll just post like a finished drawing of this eventually, so you can kind of see how the effect is like illustrated and like just what you can do to take an already existing line art and make it into something that is a lot more alive and vivid and have a lot more personality to it. Just to illustrate like one aspect of the drawing that I would also increase as well is just the legs. It's so close to us. This foot right here is like 1.5 times the size of this face. So especially when it's so close to us, it'd be really good to just like increase that. Just nice. Take your time. It's a very therapeutic, very meditative process, so don't feel the need to rush this kind of artwork. It's already unfinished anyways. It's not like you need to kind of like convince people that it's like a final product or anything. Or maybe it could be, but the beauty of line art is that a lot of information, especially like the color and the rendering, the form, is left out. There we go. Like already the shoes just look like they're about to hit your face. I didn't do like every strand of the hair. Here's what the intended effect is supposed to look like. Of course, like with like the drawing being like shaded in, because like this character's uniform, like it's black, so like a lot of details in like the socks and the shoes are going to kind of bleed in with another. I changed the line art to white just to make the contrast a little bit more strong. And also for the hair, I kind of added a little bit more dimensionality with like the highlights. Very reminiscent of how the author of this series kind of does it. For the lips as well, I kind of opted for something a little bit more subtle with the shading, with the crosshatch shading that follows the form. And then just to kind of spice up the drawing a little bit more, I've done like this subtle kind of like gradient soft brush kind of shading around the hair, just to draw focus more to like the central mass being the body, and even just like the expression, like everything points and leads to the figure itself, most of the tangents leading to the face. But composition will be another training arc to kind of like follow through with and delve in. Third key part of draftsmanship is to imply form. Not all shapes are going to have an outline. Not all shapes are going to be clearly defined by like the boundaries of like inside and outside, or like object versus like a different object like right beside it. Panty's dress over here, it's not incorrect. Like it's not wrong per se, but there seems to be a lot of information missing, because as we can see here, there is a lot of like negative space where things can be very ambiguous. When you see clothes, a lot of the time, clothes that we wear are hanging off of our bodies in one place or another. So even like for baggy parts, there's going to be bunching around the waist where the body bends. There's going to be bunching around like the arms. It's going to hang from the shoulders, so there's going to be like subtle draping that occurs from shoulder to shoulder. And so this is like crucial information to convey, especially if you want to tell the viewer the type of cloth that is being used, how thin it is, how easily deformed by like the form underneath it, how skin tight it is on the body. I think this is like a great exercise to kind of like illustrate how to imply the form that is like underneath it. Just like starting from top to bottom, we do have the breasts here. Obviously it's going to have some volume. The dress, it just kind of stops. It's very flat. We can kind of imply like a subtle like kind of line. You don't need to draw like a whole sphere underneath it. Just like an indication that there's a crease here or a crease here is like enough information to tell that the fabric bends there, and it shows like the fullness of the breast. Next, if we look on our reference model right here, the point of tension is where the torso connects with the hip right here. And obviously that pinching effect is also going to translate to the dress as well. So I'm going to draw this in like blue so it's easier to like see, like there we go, line of action, and then like the hip here. So just like tension. Maybe make that clear. So it's going to look like that. It seems like this line that I've illustrated here kind of like captures like the same tension that the reference pose illustrates. So this is where drapes are going to form at and flow away from. Just like this. It's going to flow away. It's potentially going to like dip, but we have like this piece of cloth here. It's gonna just, it's almost like the figure is like spinning, like kind of like spinning this way, or not spinning, spinning this way, where this part is like ahead of where the ends of the cloth is. It's like following through towards the right. This is a really good way to establish flow. And just make your drawings look a little bit more lively, as if the image is like moving itself. I do have like this nice little drape where the clothing just sits but doesn't exactly follow through to the edge of the cloth. I feel like this is nice to kind of illustrate like a bowing kind of effect. Yeah, just carefully follow that line. The more drastic like this line is, the more it looks like it's like twisting and turning. So like dresses that are more static are going to have a lesser curve, or like a lesser like diagonal. It's just gonna like fall flat, like something like a typical like A-line skirt that's not in motion. It's gonna look something a little bit more like this, but just like a nice little like diagonal motion. We are going to borrow Panty's design, namely the shoe, and I think this is a good way to kind of illustrate how we can like just hatch like shallow shadows or like curves that aren't necessarily, it's too strong to indicate a line, but if you're missing something from it, it's very apparent. This tongue of the shoe looks relatively flat. Like this block heel, it's okay, it's passable, but I'm sure we can do something pretty interesting with it. I've already illustrated the shoe where I've colored it in. You know what? No cheating. I'm going to do this by myself. Just color this in, kind of like this. And if you have a fill tool, that would be even better, especially if your drawing is close-ended and there's no gaps in between the shapes. So just draw that, something like this. I'm going to make my brush bigger just to make filling in drawing a lot faster. Okay, there we go. Fill in this. There we go. This is very therapeutic. There are some gaps that I left intentionally to kind of like show some kind of boundary between like the base of the shoe versus like the tongue and like this like strap that goes over, and kind of like the toe box area. Just keep it nice, and there's like some kind of like subtle indication. Yeah, even when coloring it black, I would argue there's even less information now to kind of like distinguish what's what. My first thing to tackle would be to probably get this toe box right here. So just like indicate that there's like a very small subtle corner at the toe box, and then just like, if I want to illustrate like this, like if I were to just draw a line like this, it's still passable, but personally to me, I feel like that is too sharp of a corner, especially established like right here, how there's like a gentle curve right here, right? So I would probably just like lightly just hatch it a little bit like this to indicate, maybe that's not a clear line, something like this, right? Where you can kind of see how if you look far away, it still catches the light, but it's very scattered and dithered, which creates like a nice subtle effect. So if I were to do that for the top of the toe box, and then like the apex of the foot aligning to like the tongue of the shoe, and then maybe just like separating the strap from the tongue of the shoe a little bit more, just like have like a nice little shine, kind of like that. Just clever placements of the highlights here as well. And then like for the heel of the shoe, I don't think it's that necessarily, but I think I would like to just draw some nice little highlights. Maybe just like define that a little bit more. Don't be afraid to go over multiple passes. If you're brave, I know some people would just a spot highlight. And then maybe like the curve of the shoe right here, the heel, the block heel that is rounding around the back of the foot shape. I went pretty lightly on the shoe, but in my previous example I was a little bit more heavier handed, so the details are a lot easier to see. This is just like a way to kind of like imply forms, imply shapes, imply curve without overpowering the drawing. So the nature of this kind of practice is that it's unfinished. You can't tell all of the information at once. I think that goes for any kind of like technique when it comes to illustrating or just like representing something visually, but it's better to kind of like pick and choose the information that you want to show, which will inevitably hide the other aspect on that same scale or spectrum. So if you were to take a still frame of an object or subject, you would have to pick which lines and details are the best pick to represent them. So I do have like 3 main scales. There are other ones out there that you can choose to explore. I just think I want to talk about these 2 mainly, and the middle one was just added last minute. Simple versus complex. Simple is going to have a lot less detail, but it's going to just read a lot quicker, especially if you have good shape design to it. So it's just like good shape design, easy to read. Something that's really nice about simple is that you can leave a lot of information out, so it's more imaginative. It's a lot quieter as well, so like a lot of like quieter. So a lot of pieces where they want to go a little bit more contemplative, a little bit more meditative, would gravitate to the simple side. More complex would be like more information, more detail. It's not necessarily easy to read, but I guess like maybe it is denser to read. It can still be imaginative, but it's more straightforward. Like it's more matter of fact. Like it's the information is presented to you instead of like you making it up in your head. So I think like maybe a good word for that would be communicative. There's like less room for you to guess, so maybe it's specific. And with like a lot of information, it's going to be louder. It's going to kind of like demand your visual attention. You're going to notice something a lot more complex, maybe you're going to notice it a lot faster than if something were to be simple, you can just like glaze over it. So with messy, of course, it's going to be a lot more expressive. Maybe the resolution or like the rendering is going to be like low fidelity. I would argue that maybe like messy would be louder. And so on the opposite spectrum, it's a more clean line art, so that's probably going to be it can still be expressive. It'll probably be a lot more I don't know, maybe it'll be like I could probably just put quieter for now. I keep saying quieter. It's gonna be like high clarity. Maybe not expressive. I'm still trying to find like an opposite for that. Maybe expressive is just not the right term for it. So I'll just leave it at these two for now. And then there's like the third scale, which is like more mystery versus like reality. So mystery is going to be like a lot more imaginative as well. It's going to be incomplete. It's going to be very apparent it's incomplete. Maybe like harder to read. It's less clear, so you kind of have to make up how you read the artwork in your head and kind of like come to your own conclusion to it. Maybe like inconclusive. And then reality is going to be a lot more informative. It's a lot more true to life. It's a lot more true to observation. It's going to be clear. It's going to be succinct. It's going to be maybe not necessarily easier to read, but easier to understand. So this scale and this scale are going to be demonstrated with like sketches to hopefully kind of like illustrate the effect of these a little bit more. But line art is not necessarily exclusive to these three things. So just to keep that in mind. First one is simple to complex. So this scale, we can kind of see like the same drawing. I tried to keep the style more consistent between the three, but you can kind of see how the more simple kind of like artwork focuses on maybe like shape design a little bit more. It's gonna be a lot more like you can kind of like see the expression of the lines. It's gonna be a lot more like moody. So kind of like the expression of that comes first. The more information that you put in, it's going to leave a lot less room for guesswork. But maybe like in here we can kind of see like clarity of features better. So the focus is not necessarily going to be around the face anymore. Not around the face, but like it's going to be less focused on the body per se, where this is like we can kind of clearly see that this character is hunched over a little bit. It's very like closed off, very vulnerable. We're going to see that more in the face of something that has a little bit more detail. Maybe we can see a little bit more in like the sleeves as well. It's like bunched up. Maybe like a little bit more into like the hands. And this is just like taken to the extreme a little bit with like the most complex drawing, where now we can kind of see like the eye bags. We can kind of see like the wrinkles of like the face and kind of like the general shading of the nose. We can see like the nails, and it kind of has like its own little personality to it as well. The cloth, we can kind of see it where it's kind of rough and abrasive to the skin a little bit. Maybe it kind of shows a little bit more discomfort in that area. That's just to keep in mind, there's no right answer. It's just 3 different ways of presenting the same information. Mystery versus reality. So we can kind of see these are 2 same subjects that kind of like prioritize 2 different things. So starting with the right version, something that's a lot more easier to approach. We can kind of see like the features of like the eyes, like the eye shape, and where like the pupil is looking at a lot more clear. We can kind of see like the phone and kind of like the smaller details that are on it, like the shallow recessive area of where the speaker is. We can kind of see like even like the button and the sleeve and the composition of it. The lapels, the shape is clearly defined. Like a lot of the features, like maybe like even like the hairline, you can also see like how there's like a distinct kind of like shape language in that. But it's definitely not as loud as the left one. So here we can kind of see the phone is ringing, but I think in the left version we can see that it's a lot more exaggerated, where there's like this like shaking motion to it that is making the render of the phone a lot less clear and more like it's being shaken up, as if maybe it's like its own life form, which kind of affects like the fidelity of the hand as well. Like the contours of the lines are moving along with the phone, especially towards the fingers. Parts that are not affected by the phone, like the elbow and the shoulders, are stronger lines that are like zigzags and stuff like that. That's also illustrated in the shoulder, how the kind of like attachment of the sleeve to the shoulder is just represented by like a very abstract motion, whereas in the right version it's a lot more defined. I chose to color in the tie a little bit more, just to emphasize like the effect of the shadows that are casted underneath the ears, obscuring the eyes. The nose is a little bit more ambiguous, but it's just represented by this triangle of shadow, and the same as underneath the mouth as well. And so like information that is not as important, I just kind of left out. I just didn't render them or didn't bother to draw them, because the focus that I wanted to draw is in the expression of the eyes and in the motion of the phone. Contrast between like stillness and motion. A lot of this art style on the left is inspired by fashion designer kind of like sketches and drawings, where it's like a quick kind of like drawing of the vibe and the essence and how the fabric is going to move, rather than who the character is and what they look like. The focus is on the clothes, not necessarily like the model itself. So versus like the right, where you can probably see this in like an infomercial or maybe in like some kind of like informative guide. You would probably see like this kind of clarity a lot more prominent there. And even that, this could probably be pushed even further, like to show like the age of the character, or like a more accurate portrayal of the age of the character through like the wrinkles, and maybe like through like the ruggedness of the hand. I could probably illustrate that more too, but you know, I'll probably leave that. But yeah, just two same drawings with two different intentions, but it still kind of has the same information carried between the two. So with that being said, there is an exercise that I would like you guys to do, which has 4 parts to it. So you get to draw your favorite character or OC and try to keep them consistent between the 4 panels, so it's like really easy to compare and contrast them. So for the first one, I would like you to draw in your usual line art style. Just kind of have like a control variable, or compared to like the rest of the boxes that will be like experimented on. For number 2, I want you to try to convey the same subject through using straight lines. So what this means is, can you still convey the same information without relying on curves? Can you still represent like fullness or represent like softness with straight lines? And that way it will kind of force you to not draw like 3 or 4 like hatches for like the same kind of contour that you want to illustrate. So yeah, it like you definitely don't want that like straight lines. That's gonna force you to try to like get it right in like one try as well. Number 3 is have no lines connect to each other. So this is counterintuitive to what was taught before, where it's just like to just cross the lines and then to erase them to form like an apex that is like a nice shape language. I want you to see if you can draw something where you don't need to rely on the connections to define the boundaries of shape. And then number 4 is experiment. So just try whatever style and try to push out of your own comfort zone and see what happens. So just like demonstrating on like the example that I've done here, I have like this kind of like thick kind of like brush style for like my artwork, but for the second one, it was very difficult for me to draw in straight lines. Oh, I think I mixed these two up. Yeah, maybe I mixed these two up, but like still it was kind of difficult to convey like something with like straight lines, especially when there's like the swoopiness of like the hair, or there's like this dress that begs to be like drawn in curves and stuff like that, or even like drawing the muscles and making sure that it is still angular but kind of like define like the different areas or different groups of the muscles. And number 4 was like an attempt at blind drawing, where not blind drawing but just like drawing or trying to like use one line to kind of like illustrate the subject itself, and try not to take your pen off, and you're gonna have to use like line thickness to create the illusion of just like pretending that the line never existed and darkening the areas where you definitely want the shadows to be. After this exercise is done, I think there's going to be like a 50-minute period. There are 5 artworks that I'm going to draw on top of, who have given me permission to draw over and kind of give feedback, and hopefully there'll be like a really good learning experience for the person who submitted it, but also people who are going to watch as well. This first one, They specifically requested me to talk about or just draw over number 1, which is like their usual line art style. So if I were to enlarge in that, here it is. Let me change the color to be black. There we go. So this artist is really good with like shape language and like conveying movement. Like we can kind of see how this face is like counterposed to like the body. It's also carried through to like the hip, and then there's like another counter movement here before the motion exits through the legs. And so there's like a little bit of care taken into like thickening the lines and kind of like creating like some kind of sense of dimension. So especially in like the outfit, the sleeves, and that's also very apparent in the hair as well. To kind of continue with this kind of like shape language, well, not shape language, but like this kind of like language that is conveyed through the line thickness, I would also definitely emphasize like the hair and make that slightly thicker as well. So maybe something like this to indicate that the hair is like coming towards the viewer. This will create like a very nice effect that frames this figure in the middle. So just something to kind of like round it out nicely like this. Just creates like a nice effect and pulls the focus into her expression, which then her body language is kind of like secondary to that. Something just small details. If we like zoom in a little bit, there's going to be a shadow casted by the pigtails. So personally, I would draw like a slight shadow casting, especially if this language is already established in the clothes here, namely the hair on this side as well. Just like thicken it a little bit as the pigtail is approaching the head. The shadow is also going to get thicker. Just something like this. The jawline, maybe like push that a little bit more as well. Emphasize the strand of hair. These hands are slightly farther, this particular arm is slightly farther back. I can probably forgive that a little bit. Just make that a little bit more legible. This hand, however, is closer to the viewer, so the artist has already done a really good job with thickening the sleeves. However, that shape language can also be transferred into the hand as well. Something like this, just kind of give it like a nice illusion of proximity, something like that. And like a bit shadow from the sleeves casted onto the hand. Probably make this a little bit more dynamic. And just thicken that as this sideburn approaches the bang that is covering it on top. Probably try something like this, maybe not too much. The face is very delicate, so I don't want to add too much weight to it. Something like this. And then maybe like separate the skirt a little bit from the legs and just draw a thicker line. Yep, something like that tie is also closer to us, so just make that a little bit more dramatic. Something like that. And then maybe just cast a slight shadow on the legs. However, it's also really important to notice, to bring up a notice that the artist has, this is like an old version of the drawing, so just before I was able to draw over, they did revise a lot of these effects, especially the shadow in the leg. So that's also like something to keep in mind as well. But overall, just like pushing line weight a little bit more is going to maybe something. Nah, that's kind of ruining the shape language. It's already established underneath it. Yeah, there we go. Just minor touches to kind of enhance the drawing a little bit. But yeah, overall, like, there's good shape design established underneath already, so it's already like a great foundation to draw on top of. So yeah, that is our first draw over. Overall, very appealing artwork, even without the edits already. So I'm going to move on to the second draw over. This person has also requested me to draw over the first version, so right away we can see that there's a lot of overcorrecting with the lines. So there's a pencil sketch that has been established underneath the pen drawing. However, there's still like this like unsure kind of like path from like one point to another. So especially like within the neck, maybe around like the top of the hair and like the edges of it. Like this line is really good, but it's just like some areas could use like a little bit more practice. I did notice like curves were like a bit of a difficulty, so even just like practicing a line over and over again before getting it correct would be like a good way to kind of like prevent like a lot of like these like stray lines, these tangents that are connecting to form curve. I think that would be like a good way to kind of like reduce like the amount of like strokes needed to reach from A to B. I did notice that maybe like some shapes could be corrected so they're like a little bit more symmetrical if that was not the intention that was set forth for the artist. So if I were to just kind of just draw over and correct this like eye shape a little bit, even if you're like not very confident with your lines and it ends up being a little bit frayed, you can just use like an eraser if possible to kind of just like push and like straighten out the lines a little bit. This is going to be a lot harder with like traditional mediums and stuff like that. So it's kind of more crucial to kind of like get it right in one try. There's like a lot of shadows that are being placed, which I think is like a good start. So namely, like I think this forehead establishes like really good lighting to indicate that this hair is sitting on top of the forehead. A nice tip I would like to give is that to convey like the curvature of the forehead a little bit, it would be nice to kind of have the shadow curve along to like the general forehead shape too. That's just to give it like a little bit of a sense of form. I'll probably just like draw a little shelf over the eyelid. Something that's really interesting here, I would like to talk about this, is like these points. So especially with like points of the hair, it's gonna take like a bit of guesswork to know where to thicken something or where to make something thinner. But I think a good reference is points that stick straight up are most likely going to be caught by the light that is coming from the top down. So there is like this really nice point here, it's pointing up. It's going to be closer to light, it's going to be lighter. So I would recommend maybe thinning out this line a little bit more. Something like this. While still retaining that shadow that is cast in like the corners of the hair, which is where it's going to be harder for the light to reach. So just reflecting that with this other point here and carefully making like a nice little corner is going to just give it a little bit more realism. Another thing too is that points, when they stick out towards you, it's going to catch more light, so there's going to be less shadows. Points that are going to be sticking away from you and kind of into the background are also going to be like lighter compared to like the base because they're farther away. So something that's farther away is going to be smaller. So this could also be corrected here a little bit. I could just smoothen this out a little bit. There we go. And then like this can be thinned out at the tip for the same reason. This bottom part of the hair is going to cast more shadow at the bottom, assuming the light is coming from the top. The bottom of the ear is also going to have like the same effect. It's going to capture even more shadow because it's like a corner that is very hard for light to reach. This lapel is going to be somewhat raised from the plane at the bottom, which is the jacket, the shoulder of the jacket. So I'm just going to thin this line out. And just go over it again because it's kind of like far away. Same thing as this one. This one's going to have like a nice casted shadow. And then just round this out a little bit more. This is really good with like the corner of the mouth, how there's like more shadow in here. It's hard for the light to reach. I'll probably just like add a little bit under the nose as well. But something to also reflect the curvature that is established in the forehead. The mouth curves away, or at least like the lip curves away if we were to draw like the contour lines for it. So just like rounding out that shadow is just going to create that nice illusion that the lip is turning away from the viewer. Just like clean up this a little bit. Just and then maybe like just darken this hair a little bit more. Add a little shelf underneath the lip, much like the forehead and the eyebrow. Yeah, that should be pretty good. Yeah, just simple fixes and tricks to kind of make the drawing a little bit more polished. Yeah, I think those are the changes I would make for this drawing. Also, like a really good foundation underneath as well, so just needed to adjust where the shadows are placed, and yeah. Third one, this artist has also asked me to draw over the first one, so this is kind of like their usual art style. I noticed that even though it's like a pencil drawing, I did ask them if this was like kind of like the final step that they've taken to kind of like present the line work. And they did confirm that it was, so I think I'm a little bit more confident to kind of suggest that there seem to be multiple lines kind of like drawing over like the same thing or like the same curve, as if like it was like trying to like attempt to get like the right curve through using like multiple like lines. And I would like to say that while that's like a good way to kind of like establish like a sketch as to like interpolate or kind of like estimate where the lines are going to be and how the shape is going to be defined, if this was to be like a more final sketch or like a more final line work, I would suggest picking one line. So I would probably just like guesstimate or kind of like just plot like the average of whatever is established. So just trying my best to kind of like interpret what line they would like to have. And so yeah, I'm just gonna follow through with the other part of the ear. Something that this artist has really done a great job at is creating like a good visual hierarchy. So the more bolder parts are going to be like the more prominent or more important. So especially like around the eyes, it's going to be a lot more bold. Something like this. I assume this is like the nose pattern, so I'm not going to tackle that yet. So it's really nice. Also the shape language. Shape language is like very good, especially with like the ears kind of matching the general shape of the eyes, matching like the general shape of the snout. And then like the tufts of the fur are also the same general shape as well, which is like really nice. It's very consistent. So just draw that here. And then like since the tufts of the fur inside the ear are like a secondary detail, like I noticed that the drawing is a lot lighter, which is like a really nice touch. So something like this. And like the whiskers also sticking out of the side of the face is really nice. So mostly the critique I would give for this drawing is like pick a line, like try to like define something in one stroke if it's going to be like a line work, because these multiple lines contouring like the same plane or like the same edge is going to be a little bit difficult to read. But yeah, the visual hierarchy is pretty good, especially for a pencil where it's harder to do like line thickness without going over the same line like multiple times. The cluster of information is very legible and very easy to read. So yeah, that's pretty good. And then like the neck, the shoulder seems to be like generally like unrendered and unfinished compared to like the rest of the drawing, which I don't quite mind. I think that's not a bad idea to do, especially if you want to focus on like the face and like the patterns of the face rather than like the whole body itself. So yeah, moving on to the next drawing. So we do have this selection from this artist. They specifically asked me to critique number 4. So I'm just going to zoom into that. Now, first thing I noticed was that the drawing seems to be relatively unfinished, which is not a bad thing with line art. However, the thing that makes the unfinished line art look somewhat finished is where they draw focus to the particular artwork itself. So in this case, the face and the body kind of have the same like rendering fidelity as like something like the wings. So it kind of makes it hard for the viewer to kind of see or choose where to focus, especially when the drawing is just mostly like the figure and the wings. So I would probably ask this artist, especially if like there's like an allocated amount of time to be allotted, and if there were to be maybe some kind of like time limitation, to choose where to focus on the particular artwork itself. And I guess like if there's going to be like if the artist still chooses to like draw like the whole figure and the wings itself, it's just like what parts to prioritize. Like the wings could probably be like left like somewhat like more bare bone, whereas if these lines were to be allocated in like the figure itself, that would be like, I feel like a lot better, like not only just like brush economy, but just like using that same amount of effort to just bring focus somewhere. So if I were to look closer at this drawing, I feel like maybe like the artist wanted to convey like the expression and kind of like the body language of the figure here, which is like very closed and very vulnerable. And yet the contrast of the wings spreading out kind of like indicates something a little bit different. Maybe like a contrasting motif here. I would like to see where this artist goes with the drawing. If there's like a little bit more like fidelity and a little bit more like time, and a little bit more like details and information. But I think that there's already like, I think like a good kind of like intention or foundation that's already established in the pose, which I think is really cool. Something I also like to notice as well is that like for like good brush economy, I noticed like this artist like uses like the same lines to kind of like define like maybe like the shoulders and like the arms at the same time, or maybe like somewhat in like the leg and like going into the foot as well. which I do like. I think that's like a point of interest. It's going to be a lot harder to achieve that. It's like a higher error, or like a higher error margin. But I think, like, let's say for example, if I were to like just like draw like the face and the ear as well, there's like a nice pressure around like this jawline, and like just like this point of interest that is already created within one stroke underneath the ear. Whereas if I were to separate that, let's see here, and then like draw the ear like that, like as two different strokes, it's going to create like a different kind of like effect where the shadow kind of like tapers, and I would have to kind of like just draw that ambient occlusion underneath it. It's fine, but I think this is just like a more visually distinct style where if it can be like mastered and it can still be like very legible and very clear, like it could like be its own style in it of itself. Like, still very hard to do, but I think there's like a good foot moving forward. Overall, I would just say like focus on an area. That's the beauty of line art. You can leave a lot of areas unfinished if you allow yourself to kind of like focus, especially in like the core of the body right here. I think that would make for a really effective drawing. Lastly, we do have this drawing here where the artist has requested to draw over number 1. So if I were to take a look, I think first thing I noticed is the relationship of the position of the eye versus like the overall position of the head. So this is like a head straight on, where you would see like both corners of the eyes like this. Whereas if you were to turn like the head somewhat slightly sideways like this, you would kind of see like the curvature of the eyes, and you would only see like one corner versus like seeing both corners face front, because the edge of this eye is obscuring the corner that is right behind it. So translating that to this drawing here, I would probably adjust the shape of the eye to be somewhat like shorter than what was previously established, and then just indicate a curve here, kind of like this, and maybe like you can kind of get away with like drawing like a little corner right next to the curvature, and then just having that just indicates like a roundness in the form, whereas before it would be ambiguous as to if this eye was to be like straight on, viewed straight on, or if it was intended to be a curve. So that's one thing to notice. I do like the shape language that is established from the bridge of the eye to the nose, to the mouth, to the chin. I think that is a very strong and established foundation for it. I would probably cast more shadow within the mouth to indicate that this is like the inside of the cheek. It has its own thickness, which pushes back the teeth a little bit. So the corner of the mouth here is established, very good. And then the thickness of the lip is also established there. There we go. The top of the lip, I agree with that. That's also a good placement. The nose is, I didn't catch this before, but the nostril of the nose, I would probably just like indicate lower and make it more of a slit rather than a hole, because it seems like we're looking at this nose from like a direct angle, instead of from a bottom up kind of view where we would expect nose or like nostrils to be seen kind of like that. I think if we were to expect a nose to be seen on the side, it's very rare for like the wing of this nose to reveal itself, or like kind of like reveal like a hole on the side versus like a slit. And if they were to reveal as a hole, usually that would be because the septum of the nose, like right here, is lower than the wing. So that would be like a reason as to why a hole can be seen on the side view. So just something to consider. If you do need references, it would also be really good to check, because nose angles are very difficult to draw. Something I also noticed as well, which I didn't notice last time, this brow line right here, where it connects to the bridge of the nose, would indicate that the eyebrow is like lying on top of the brow bone or even behind it. It would be difficult to show it above and over the kind of like brow bone that is established for like the second eye. This is, I agree with obscuring that in darkness. I think that would make sense. Something I would also like to talk about is this hair. So since this, I did ask if this was intended to be a ponytail that is directly on the back of the head. It was, that was the intention. So I would say that this ponytail would be a lot more obscured by the shape of the head itself. The back of the head would be like somewhat in this plane right here behind the head. So I would probably argue that the ponytail should be like somewhat like right here, which makes it completely invisible from the side of the head right here. I would probably position the ponytail to be something like this, where as opposed to what has been established in this drawing previously. Maybe I would like to push this ear a little bit farther back so that like the earlobe would connect better to the end of the earlobe would connect to the end of the jaw. I would probably address that. So I do like the shape language right here for the bangs. However, I think that this bang is a little bit indecisive, and I don't think the intention of this bang was to be like straight flush onto the side of the head. I think it is intended to fall in front of the face. So realistically, if this was to be like portrayed in a way where you would see it as it is in real life, this bang would probably cut in front of the eye like this. Something like this. However, I do know that this is not a very ideal placement for the hair, because you're missing like the expression that's made in the eye. A lot of animators or like manga artists also really like this hairstyle, but they kind of cheat a little bit and they kind of just push it over to the side a little bit more just to like show the eyes a little bit, but still have it like somewhat hovering in front of the face like this. And this is just like one of many examples as to like the choices like that artists make to kind of like compromise on what is like real and existing in the real world, and like the fantasy that they kind of want in their head. Because yeah, like this hair would look a lot different in real life if you were to look at it. So realistically, you probably want your hair to look like this in your head on a straight view, and then like in the 3/4 it's gonna look a little bit like this. Maybe here, there we go. And then like in 3/4 you probably want it to look a little bit more like this. In real life though, it's gonna look a little bit more like this. So it's gonna look something like, let me erase this for a sec. And the eye's gonna be like right here. No. Eyes here, eyes here. Yeah, this is not ideal, or if you were to draw like a front looking face, like this will probably be fine, but then like this hair will kind of look like that in like the front view. But suspension of disbelief, we kind of just make choices to make things look a lot more appealing than they do in real life. So keep in mind, not everything is set in stone, and that's why with art, I guess like the beauty of it, you can just like kind of make stuff up. So yeah, I'm not gonna focus too much on the line thickness. I think there's like really good like ambient occlusion. I think like the line width in general, I would like agree with. It's usually pretty consistent. Oh, one more thing too. The shadow underneath the chin, like this, is very defined, but I would also argue that the shadow underneath the nape of the hair and the neck where it meets is also going to cast a lot of like darkness, so I would probably just color that in a little bit more, as you've already established with the hatching. But overall, I think this is like a really good lesson on not just like line thickness, and not just like shape language, but also just positioning things in perspective, and keeping in mind of how the form works in 3D, and then translating that back into 2D. So yeah, I think that's all for the draw over portion of this workshop. And so I kind of just want to wrap it up. Q&A, maybe that's not really possible with like the re-recording, but if anyone has any questions that they want answered, please feel free to message me on Instagram at bd.chau, or like my email, so that would be buuchau at, buuchau @gmail.com. And I'd be more than happy to answer your questions there. Also, I'm also available on Discord, so my Discord username is BUU1827. So that should be my username. Just to wrap up this presentation, I do have an art book that is available. It comes with the 3 Realms sticker pack. It also comes with a holographic postcard. If you are part of the Visual Arts Club, or if you participated in the workshop, you are also eligible to grab a goose sticker and a goose postcard at the same time. There are over 70 illustrations and stories, and the books have already arrived. So if you are interested in a copy or want to talk more about it, feel free to reach out. I do have links for anyone who's interested in grabbing a copy, but I also have a QR code for a shop website in case you want like the individual prints that are seen within the books. So any any kind of support is welcome. I do appreciate at least people who participated or like joined in with the lecture for like the training arc, the line art style. So any bit helps. Um, Lastly, again, just like contact details. Um, there's this QR code here that will take you to links of links. Feel free to reach out. And I do have like a website too that's listed here where you can like find me in case the QR code doesn't work. And then to wrap it up for real, thank you. I appreciate your time today. Never forget, art is an ongoing process that never ends, but anyone can do it. Lastly, I just want you guys to know art is fun. You should have fun while you're doing it. And that'll be all from me.